It's a big difference because it's really about the frequency of conversations and the quality of conversations, because when you're meeting more often, you're more aware of what's happening. You've got the opportunity to provide coaching as a leader and to get awareness and course correct along the way. Using AI can pull that in as well, along with all this other rich data. And it just makes such a more compelling story. And it's so much easier to write too, because you've got AI as an assistant that's there to give you ideas. This is a really fair appraisal because it looked at the spectrum of everything you did versus just some manager's mind of what happened in the last month. But it's kind of like a sports team without a coach, right? Like, how would you possibly get away with doing that season after season by just players doing it all on their own without somebody really to guide them through it?
Inspired Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Diamond Arnold. I'm here with our CEO and founder, Chris Wollerman of Inspire Software. Chris, thanks for coming back and continuing this conversation about how to effectively use AI as an executive leader to create a strategy and then turn that strategy into action. Welcome back.
Yep. Good to be here.
The big problem that we often talk about is organizations set a strategy. They put a lot of time and effort into creating a strategy, either an annual strategy, quarterly strategy. And then the big gap is actually executing that strategy and be able to analyze, what's working, what's not working with the strategy beyond just the numbers. I mean, we can easily look at numbers real quick and say, yeah, we're on or we're off. But there's a little bit more to it than that. Where we get to today is we're talking about really the engine that runs the strategy execution process, and we call that continuous performance management. I would like you to describe to listeners how you came to continuous performance management and your experience as a CEO and running a couple different companies and working with clients. How is continuous performance management, or we call it CPM, how is that different than traditional performance, and why is it more effective in terms of executing strategy today?
It's a big difference because it's really about the frequency of conversations and the quality of conversations, because when you're meeting more often, you're more aware of what's happening. You've got the opportunity to provide coaching as a leader and to get awareness and course correct along the way. Traditional performance management is set a goal at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year appraise on it, and doesn't always even include a self-assessment, which is kind of crazy. I think most companies doing traditional are at least doing self-assessments, but that whole 12-month period or 11 months between when the goal's set and when they're appraising, there's very little conversation around what's happening with performance, right? So even if you have really good communication up front, people know what to do, because it's not continually discussed and conversations around it, it tends to slip to the back of the priority list. Strategy versus operations, there's always this inherent conflict between, I like to use the analogy of the driving to work and in a car, and you've got a gas pedal and a brake, and which one do you use on the way to work, right? And people kind of look confused and say, well, I use both. And that's the idea behind strategy execution. Is you can look at your day job, where you've got all kinds of tasks and activities and things that you're supporting your role on as maybe your gas pedal. But strategy is all about making some improvements, aligning to the company goals. There are more of those things that you've got to act upon instead of coming at you. And they tend to be more like the brake. And in a lot of places, it never gets used. It's just gas all the time. And because if you're having continuous performance conversations, you're at least hitting it at a monthly frequency. We do it weekly, really, to just see how things are going. It's not necessarily every week, but out of a 13-week quarter, usually 10 or 11 of those get um, met where you're meeting one-on-one with people, and it just brings that awareness and opportunity to make things happen along the way. And it's just such a huge difference when you take a whole year of 40 meetings versus 2 meetings.
But I just want to make a comment from an individual perspective. We talk about how this is helpful for executives, continuous performance and more data that's in, having one-to-one conversations, team meetings, capturing those notes. It creates this what we call warm data or qualitative data that explains the quantitative numbers. From an individual perspective or a team member perspective, what I like about continuous performance, and I think that there's a lot of research on how continuous performance can increase engagement of employees. It creates more awareness of an individual on what the company strategy is.
And there's many benefits of the continuous performance, but when the CEO or the leadership goes through the strategy and tries to communicate, the first time there's a lot of misses on did people really understand what that meant, right? And if the company's doing well when it comes to communication, it won't just be a one-time shot. It'll be here's the broadcast announcement, and then let's take it to some town halls. Let's take it into some team workshops so they really understand. So that helps. But I do think like the conversations that are happening, whether it's week by week or every 2 weeks, you gradually start to better understand. Sometimes at both levels, right? The manager and the employee. The manager is not always, depending on what level in the organization they are, they're not always fully in sync either. And so those conversations that are happening may then raise questions to the next manager up the chain, like, all right, I do need to better understand this. Really, and what we saw in our survey data when people started doing frequent one-on-ones is I have a much better understanding of how my job impacts the company strategy. And I know where the company's going, and I feel better about my team and the organization. So there's a lot of benefits that come from just getting together for 20, 30 minutes.
There's a lot of confusion in the marketplace about what continuous performance actually is. Describe to me the difference, like, is continuous performance, does it exclude, like, there's a lot of organizations move to just continuous performance. They don't do performance reviews or appraisals, and they don't do performance agreements. They're just doing continuous performance. Describe to us like the pros and cons of, can you have one without the other? Do you have to do continuous performance, or can you use continuous performance and still do a little bit more of the traditional process?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think when it first became popular that let's get rid of the annual appraisal and go to something different, the pendulum kind of swung all the way to the other side, and um, employees and HR and companies realized they might have made a too drastic move by taking away all of the annual stuff. So what we've done, and I think we found a really good balance that we still have different each quarter. We might bring in just goals in the first quarter, but then the next quarter we'll bring values and goals together, and then the following third quarter we'll start to talk about competencies, and then the fourth really kind of looking back at the full year in addition to just the goals that quarter. So there are ways where you can kind of spread it out and make it where it's still lightweight throughout the year if you're doing 4 different reviews quarterly, or some we did it trimesters in my previous company. And at a big company, trimesters is probably a good way where they're lightweight, but you're capturing enough of the information and the insight that you would want to have at the end of year. And then you just bring all that data together. And so it makes it easier where you're not in this death march in December or whenever they're scheduled to be done, where people are just having to do, especially if you have a team of more than 6 or 8 people and you've got to do these appraisals and gathering all this data and stuff. And so by having frequent check-ins, whether it's check-ins on progress in a system, and then being able to talk about that along the way, all of that data that's being built can feed into those quarterly and end of year appraisals.
How does AI affect this continuous performance process, especially when it comes into, the end of a quarter and kind of putting a stamp on what you did this quarter?
Beauty of recording transcripts, even in like I had a one-on-one in person earlier this week with one of my direct reports, but we still sat by his computer, logged into Teams, and it recognizes the two different voices. And so you're recording transcripts. You don't have to sit there taking notes and missing notes, that a lot of people still struggle with. And that transcript being generated by AI and then asking questions about summarizing, pulling out action items. And then when you're to answer your question about the end of the quarter, you've got all this really rich content of the discussions that happened along with check-in data. So any progress updates where you put in, I went from this number to this number and here's why. Real simple weekly check-in, but those build up and they really tell a story throughout the whole quarter and throughout the whole year if you're on a longer term goal. Recognition that's happening throughout the time period, all that data along with these conversations, and then the employee self-assessment. The employee can use that to help build their self-assessment, but then the manager using AI can pull that in as well along with all this other rich data. And it just makes such a more compelling story. And it's so much easier to write too, because you've got AI as an assistant. Feel really good about that process. Like when I'm giving somebody an appraisal, like this is a really fair appraisal because it looked at the spectrum of everything you did versus just some manager's mind of what happened in the last month.
What do you say to either an executive leader or to organizations saying, yeah, we don't want to capture all that information, or it feels a little big brother-ish, like somebody's always looking over us? What's the benefit of doing it in a way where you're capturing this data? What are the pros and cons of that?
Start with the employee, like what's in it for me. So if you can't convince them that there's value and continuous performance, you're doing something wrong. Because I do think that if you get it set up, and the other thing we didn't really talk about with the AI that is another really big contributor to the value of it is preparing the one-on-one. I think what we've seen is employees want to have the one-on-ones and they want to keep them going because they're seeing if they're done in a quality way, it's not just a status meeting that they've got to report up to their manager, here's what I'm doing. But it's more of a development conversation along the way, career development, help me really better understand, how I can excel in my role as well as helping the company out. So that's, I think, making sure you're getting the what's in it for me to the employee.
Why is it so important to have a common language, and how does AI play in that today, in that language, leadership language?
Yeah. So teaching like self-leadership to everybody in the organization is a really good way to start because it sets them up for success. Here's how to ask for the right type of help rather than showing up to your one-on-one and your manager's got an agenda or you're just got a, here's what I'm working on kind of task list, right? You really want self-leaders to be looking at their goals, self-diagnosing where they think they're at with their readiness on the goal or development level on the goal. And then in your prompting, preparing for a one-on-one, for example, say I want to prepare for a one-on-one with my manager. Behind the scenes in that prompt, it's totally aware of the leadership language that the company is really trying to teach people. And then in the moment, as they're preparing, whether it's every week or every so often, it's going to be there to really coach and assist you on how to you best prepare for a one-on-one from that perspective. And then same thing on the manager. Sometimes managers are, you understand the model and the language, but you're really in a challenging situation where, this person's been flatlined on this goal and I've tried all these things, what can I do in this next one-on-one to help this person succeed? And AI, we've seen it start getting much better return on investment for leadership development or from leadership development because people are actually using it in that are regular conversations and getting coached and supported by AI, which I think people are going to really appreciate.
They're applying it, and not only that, those conversations create the rich data for you to analyze not only how is that leadership evolving and developing, but how's it affecting the overall performance and the goals. And that's where it kind of ties back into the strategy. Like, why is continuous performance such a powerful solution to executing strategy effectively?
When you get in a organization and a rhythm that you're actually seeing high numbers on strategy execution, it's pretty clear that this really does work. And it's not that hard. It's really just removing roadblocks from people, giving them some coaching and support, and sometimes teaching, and that's where getting tasks done is what executes the strategy.
You've led a couple companies, you work with CEOs, you work with executive teams. Why is it important for them to consider partnering with somebody to help them become more effective at executing their strategy in the organization?
It's pretty easy to hear about what the way things work, or read a book like Measure What Matters, which is a bestseller that we've had a lot of CEOs or people in a company that said my CEO read this and wants to do it. But there's nothing like living through it, and as we've seen hundreds of organizations now go through similar patterns of what works, what doesn't work. And OKRs, for example, feels like a really simple framework. And the concept is simple, but when it comes to bringing it into your organization, the change management that's necessary, the subtle nuances of setting good goals and how to hold good one-on-ones, having a coach there to help you through, I don't see how you could do without it and be successful. Some can, I'm sure, but it's kind of like a sports team without a coach, right? Like, how would you possibly get away with doing that season after season by just players doing it all on their own without somebody really to guide them through it?
So appreciate everyone that has viewed this and is watching this or listening to it. We hope that you like and subscribe to it. Feel free to reach out to us and ask us questions. We'd love to have a podcast on ideas that you send to us, or tough questions for us to wrestle with and talk about in future podcasts. We hope you get some value out of it. Chris, thanks again for your time, and thanks for all of your insights.
All right. Thanks, Jason. Thanks everybody if you made it this far, happy to continue on and look to see you in another podcast.